Christoph Heusgen, thanks for speaking to DW. Israel is saying that it's on the brink of mounting a new offensive against Rafah, the town at the very bottom of the Gaza Strip. Over 1 million Gazans have sought refuge there. There are fears that there could be another wave of casualties. If we look at Germany and the United States, really Israel's two biggest supporters, are we getting to the point where you think they need to say to Israel, enough is enough?
Well, the German foreign minister has already said it's hell there, and I think this must not happen. The protection of civilians is key. So many thousands of children have already been killed, and there is apparently no end in sight. So I really hope that Netanyahu reconsiders, that he does what 150 countries and more asked in the United Nations and finally agree to a ceasefire.
And yet that message is evidently not getting through from Germany or the United States to Netanyahu.
Well, it's for the politicians to see what instruments do they have so that their appeal is actually heard. We have seen President Biden, we have seen Tony Blinken ask Netanyahu to stop and have a ceasefire to allow for more help to come in. And we'll see in a short time when the Israeli government has to deliver a report to the International Court of Justice what it does to prevent genocide. And we need a stop of this killing.
Do you believe that there is any evidence that the genocide could be taking place or at risk of taking place?
Well, this is what the International Court has said by accepting the South African request, and it has said there is a danger of genocide, and to prevent this, it asks certain measures to be taken, and this will now have to be delivered to the court, and we'll see what Israel does to prevent a genocide.
Now, all of this means that Germany, the United States, and also other Western supporters of Israel find themselves accused of caring more, say, about Ukrainian civilians than about Palestinian civilians. By the sound of what you're saying, it sounds like you can understand where that criticism is coming from.
Well, we hear this. As I said, there are 150 countries who urgently ask for a ceasefire. This is a majority of nations, and I think this is something that the international community asks for, and I think this is what should be asked the Israeli government to actually implement.
Now, the other kind of major conflict not far from here that's raging in Europe, of course, Russia's war against Ukraine, which has been grinding on for so long. We see a certain amount of jitters in the West here. We see the American military support could be, close to the brink of collapse. We saw Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, was just in Washington. He warned that Ukraine is absolutely dependent on that support. The strong implication being that if that support falls away, then Ukraine loses. Is that the situation we're looking at?
Well, the jury is still out. I think that the US president, the US government is pushing for the continuation of delivery of weapons to Ukraine. We just saw that in the Senate there was a 2/3 majority in favor of it. And I just can't believe that US parliamentarians will let Ukraine down and will Vladimir Putin strike a victory. So I don't believe that. On the other hand, what I must say, there's always something positive even in the worst developments. And this is a European awakening. We see very clear the German Chancellor assuming a leading role in Europe for the support of Ukraine. He's really drumming up support from his European partners to do more. I think we'll see a drive now for more European defense, for the European Union to assume more responsibility, and this is what we need in general. We need the European Union, the European countries, the European members of NATO to assume more responsibility for European security, because no matter who will be the next US president, it's clear that the US will have to concentrate on their domestic challenges, and they will concentrate on Asia, and therefore Europe has to do its homework.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, you were talking about the elephant in the room causing a lot of angst here in Europe, a possible second Trump administration. Over the weekend, Donald Trump was saying that he would even encourage Vladimir Putin to attack NATO members that he feels are not paying their dues. What does Europe need to do in that regard? Because Europe is totally dependent on American nuclear weapons.
Well, there are several questions. But first of all, that may surprise you, but Donald Trump has a point. You know, the European members of NATO, all member states of NATO, have committed 10 years ago to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. And many countries, including my own, have not delivered. They have only now finally, with a special effort, reached these 2%. And it will be key that Germany and other partners continue to do that, not to do a favor to President Trump, but to secure European protection, to strengthen the European part of NATO. With regard to European cooperation, with regard to the nuclear umbrella, of course we rely on the US, but at the same time, I think it would be safe for Germany, for the other European NATO partners to actually pick up what the French president has offered, to have a discussion about the force de frappe, about the nuclear French forces, and we should add Great Britain to that discussion and see how much are we ready to have as a complementary shield, a European protection by those Europeans who have at their disposal their own nuclear forces.
Now, at the same time, on Ukraine, you've been saying that it's really time to be thinking about the form of negotiations that could happen at the end of this conflict, whenever this conflict does come to an end, a ceasefire and a negotiating process. What could that involve? How do you envisage that? Well,
when you look at conflicts worldwide, most have not only ended, but they have ended with some kind of agreement. And therefore, I think we have to look at it. It could be something like the Minsk agreement, which is not favorably looked at, but I think it's not favorably looked at not because of its content, because the content is pretty normal. You ask for a ceasefire, you ask a withdrawal of heavy weapons, you have an observer troop, you have a political perspective, all this. The criticism that is at Minsk and other agreements is that Russia just tears these kind of agreements apart when it suits the president. And therefore, what is key for any agreement that we could enter and could have in the end, there have to be guarantees. There have to be security guarantees that Vladimir Putin knows he has to pay a price if he again tears up an agreement. And from my perspective, the best would be for Ukraine to join NATO, the strongest military alliance.
And do you imagine that as being part of a deal where then Ukraine does cede some territory to Russia? So Russia keeps the Donbass, the rest of Ukraine goes into NATO, for instance?
I think it's a very bad idea just to think about ceding territory. This means that by force you change borders in Europe, and I think that cannot be part of any agreement. No, it's what kind of agreement we have in the end. We have to see. The Ukrainians have to decide for this. Could this be something temporary, as it was foreseen for the Donbass in the 2015 Minsk agreement? This is for the Ukrainians to decide how they want to play it. But again, to change borders in Europe by force would set a horrible precedent. I think shouldn't be. Key is security, key is guarantees, so that Putin knows this is where the buck stops.
Yeah, and it's clear in your own report that Ukrainians don't want to give up any territory, and that is, of course, highly understandable. But the Minsk agreement, it just froze the conflict. And isn't this the concern?
Well, you have to understand this is only part of it. When Minsk was concluded, there was Russia was attacking. President Poroshenko told Chancellor Merkel he needs to have a ceasefire because otherwise the Russian troops at the time could march all the way to Minsk, to Kiev. So what was Minsk about was a ceasefire, which by the way, the Russians didn't really observe, but it did have this political perspective that after a certain autonomy that would have been granted to the Donbass, there would be a kind of a reunification, and Ukraine would again have the sovereignty over this territory. So I think the agreement was a good one. The problem was the implementation, that Vladimir Putin was not ready to implement it.
But just a final question. I mean, you suggest that there could be an agreement where Russia withdraws all of its troops and Ukraine also joins NATO. For Russia to go along with something like that, they would probably need to be under much greater military pressure than they are now, wouldn't they?
Well, this is why we have to see that Ukraine continues to be armed with all arms that are at our disposal, because after all, they defend our freedom. It's the Ukrainians, but also ours, because Vladimir Putin has said publicly that he wouldn't stop there. So we have to support for Vladimir Putin. He has to understand that he cannot gain by prolonging this war, that he cannot win this war. And you can see that while he gives the appearance of being the strong man who has everything under control, that there are the first effects of and strong effects of sanctions. Their fleet of airplanes from Airbus and Boeing is grounded. You could see that he lost face last week when he had to stop one of the candidates that who nobody knew before was running for president on a ticket that was against the war. And he was scared that all of a sudden the momentum this person created was enormous, so that he had to stop that. This shows a sign of weakness, so we have to continue to push him into this. One of the things that's very important, by the way, is, and we try to do this also on the Munich Security Conference, that we have to talk to those countries that don't implement sanctions, to think about this, to think about if it wouldn't suit their interests better if an aggressor like Russia would be put into his place to stop similar things from happening in other parts of the world.
So lots to look out for at the Munich Security Conference. Thank you very much, Christoph Heusgen.
Thank you very much for your questions.